The vaults of Fallout are one of the series' most iconic features. Huge underground shelters built and marketed by the Vault-Tec Corporation as a way for America to ride out a nuclear war in safety and comfort. While on the surface, Vault-Tec had the appearance of a squeaky clean company, its cheerful Vault Boy mascot and the hopeful marketing they pushed on the American public before the Great War was nothing but an elaborate smokescreen. By the late 2050s, the writing was on the wall. Full-scale atomic war was becoming a real possibility, and certain parts of the United States government and military-industrial complex began workshopping solutions. What they settled on was Project Safehouse, a series of bunkers for the government and civilian population to ensure America's survival. The Vault-Tec Corporation won the bid, but before they began construction, their leadership was taken aside by their new employers. The truth of the matter was that the cash-strapped government simply didn't have the money or resources to house hundreds of millions of American citizens, but they did have the means to adjust the parameters of Vault-Tec's contract. These government contacts instead intended the vaults to be used as a grand staging ground for twisted and often deadly social and technological experimentation in the cramped, claustrophobic confines of their tunnels. The morally bankrupt leadership at Vault-Tec leapt at the opportunity and began revising their construction and administration plans. 122 public vaults had been built by the time the bombs dropped in 2077, and of that number, only 17 were designed for their advertised purpose, to protect their inhabitants. The other 105 had terrible trials in store for them, both those insisted upon by the shadowy government insiders the company had grown so close to, as well as some suggested by Vault-Tec itself. Many of these experimental vaults were lost to time, with nothing being known of their status, purpose, or existence, but there are a few of which Wastelanders know a great deal. These dark, rusted shells blight the wasteland wherever they lurk, the memory of the cruel experiments carried out within still discussed in whispers among those brave enough to explore them. This list covers all the known vaults designed with experimentation in mind, as well as their inevitable, often deadly fates. Out of all Vault-Tec's offerings, 4 was unique, as its experiment was advertised to the public before its sealing. The shelter would be run by accomplished scientists, who would have total control over the civilian population living alongside them. As one might expect, when confronted with no consequences for their actions or overreach, the genetic experiments being performed became increasingly sinister and depraved, with human testing becoming the norm, resulting in the birth of abominations that began to fill the lab's cryostasis wing. They even went as far as abducting Wastelanders to use in their work until the community of volunteers around them finally had enough. Rising up against the scientists, the Dwellers unleashed their own test subjects against them, the mutated creatures slaughtering the staff that had once ruled over the vault. Following that violent escapade, 4 became a beacon of hope for the wasteland, offering aid and shelter for anyone willing to integrate into their society, however strange they may be. As a result, the population of 4 has become a strange bunch indeed, filled with refugees, mutants, and malcontents, all eager to find a vault that doesn't want them dead. A twisted parody of the United States democratic traditions, Vault 11 was built around the concept of sacrifice. When the residents filed in at the start of the war, the experiment was revealed to them. Every year, they would have to select one of their number to be a sacrifice. They would enter a special chamber buried deep below the Overseer's office, where they would be killed by the vault. If the Dwellers failed to send someone into the chamber, the vault's systems would instead kill them all. Enraged that they hadn't been notified of this little wrinkle by Vault-Tec, they ended up forcing the company-appointed Overseer into the chamber first, making him the first sacrifice. As the years dragged on, it became tradition for the position of Overseer to be sacrificed at the end of their yearly term, and a strange voting system emerged. Political blocs would compete to nominate the most hated residents for Overseer, with cutthroat campaigns dooming them to death. These blocs gained more and more power until an Overseer finally attempted to end the practice, insisting that a random lottery would be more fair. Terrified of losing their power, the blocs rebelled and the ensuing chaos decimated the vault's population. By the time the fighting had subsided, only 5 Dwellers remained alive. They bravely marched up to the vault computer and declared that the sacrifices would finally stop. To their horror, they were greeted by a cheery automated message. congratulating them on their commitment to morality. There was no revenge enacted upon them by the Vault, no need for further sacrifice, nothing. They had been killing their own for nothing. As the computer praised their team spirit while unsealing the blast doors, 4 of the 5 took their own lives, unable to live with the guilt of what they'd done. The last fled into the wastes, determined to spread the grim tale of Vault 11 and the cruelty of the company that created it. Buried below the city of Bakersfield, Vault 12 was advertised as one of the most secure and well-protected of all Vault-Tec offerings, but ironically, was one of the least. The structure was built without any form of radiation shielding, and the famous gear-shaped blast door was unable to be fully closed. As a result, the hapless residents of 12 were bombarded by steady waves of radiation, sickening and killing many of them. The rest were transformed into ghouls, who less than 5 years after the war escaped the doomed project, founding the Ghoul City of Necropolis on its glowing bones. By 2161, the Vault only had one functioning piece of hardware, a water chip for the city's purifiers, enabling the City of the Dead to survive, if not thrive, in the wasteland. A more forgiving experiment enabled the survival of Vault 15, with its population being sourced from radically different ideologies. Anarchists, communists, fascists, hippies, separatists, survivalists, and pacifists all called 15 their home. Despite the difficulties of living with their polar opposites, the dwellers managed to keep themselves from tearing each other apart until they finally had enough, spilling out of the vault only a single generation after its sealing. The denizens of Vault 15 would go on to form the Great Khans, Jackals, and Vipers, 3 powerful raider gangs that would terrorize the region for years, as well as a smaller group which founded the town of Shady Sands using the Vault's GEC, creating the basis of what would become the new California Republic. The facility itself would fall into disrepair, picked over by scavengers and wildlife before partially collapsing, burying whatever valuables might still be left in its depths. Not much is known about the ultimate fate of Vault 19, but the nature of its experiment can still be gleaned from the diaries and terminal entries of its residents, as well as the unusual layout of the facility itself. Divided into 2 identical sections, the red and blue halves of the vault were each led by their own overseers, who were given the task of inducing paranoia in the dwellers under their care. By engineering small but persistent malfunctions and fluctuations in the vault's systems, they caused the population to become suspicious of not only the other side, with reds and blues keeping to their own, but even within their own families and social circles. Strange gusts of wind from the ventilation system, the hallway lights blinking like some sort of code, and strange, high-pitched noises all drove the residents slowly mad. By 2281, the vault had been long abandoned with no signs of violence or a struggle, leading many to speculate on the final consequence of the constant gaslighting of the citizens of 19. Still, it's an out-of-the-way hidey hole with power and water intact, and that's been enough to attract a group of escaped convicts looking to lay low. Who's to say if these new inhabitants will fall prey to the same paranoia that doomed those who came before? Vault 21 was located under Las Vegas's main strip and was one of the few experimental vaults that actually succeeded in protecting its residents over the long haul thanks to its relatively tame experiment. Instead of having the usual overseer-staff-dweller hierarchy in place, every decision and conflict would be resolved through gambling. The complex was equipped with a wide variety of casino games, with blackjack and roulette proving most popular amongst its residents. Naturally, this cultivated an obsession with luck and chance amongst the vault's population, and when they were finally contacted by the strip's de facto overlord, Mr. House, with an offer to purchase the vault, they put it up to chance. A high-stakes game of blackjack followed, and with a very risky move finally ending the exhausting hours-long game, those willing to sell had come out on top. Fearing anyone having access to the underbelly of his city, Mr. House proceeded to fill the lower levels of 21 with concrete, forcing the residents out and across the wasteland. Only the very top level of the vault was preserved, transformed into the Vault 21 Hotel and Gift Shop, an undignified end for such an advanced bit of technology, but undoubtedly popular with tourists visiting the south side of the Strip. Built under Santa Monica, LA, the 3 vaults were a series of interconnected communities supposedly designed to promote cooperation and unity amongst the traditionally isolated vault societies. With this uncommon configuration first appearing in Season 1 of the Fallout TV show, it's unknown how many other vaults share this innovative layout. Trading resources, ideas, and people, these three communities would ensure that each vault could rely on each other in times of hardship. In reality, Vaults 33 and 32 were designed as nothing more than a support system for 31, breeding stock to fulfill the dream of its overseer, Bud Askins. Kept alive for hundreds of years in a custom RoboBrain chassis, the Vault-Tec executive exercised control over the other two vaults using the population of 31, hundreds of company managers frozen in cryostasis, ready to be inserted into the other vaults' populations as necessary, disguised as transfers from the supposedly normal Vault 31. These managers would interbreed with 33 and 32 while influencing their societies, bending them subtly to Askin's will. Eventually, Bud hoped his work would be complete, and the entire population would be transformed into the perfect corporate managers ready to go out and inherit the world his company helped ruin. Eventually, Vault 32 uncovered this deception and descended into civil war, with some supporting Bud's mission and others resenting their nature as unwitting test subjects, wanting to take control of the Vault for their own sakes. The bloody conflict decimated the Vault's population, with the survivors attempting to cut through the doors into 33 in a vain attempt to warn them of 31's deception. They all perished as the Vault systems collapsed. Following an assault by raiders using the empty 32 as a staging ground, Vault 33 is bloodied but still on its feet, racked by internal tensions and with a smashed water chip. The clock is ticking if any of the three vaults wish to survive, and the future is grim. Vault 34, located in the Mojave Wasteland east of New Vegas, had little direct meddling with its population after the doors closed. They didn't release gas into the halls, nor did they transform it into some gruesome slaughterhouse. Instead, everything wrong with 34 was built into its very foundations. The vault was purposely overpopulated with very few private living spaces, unable to support the increased numbers. The armory was also drastically expanded and disconnected from the vault's standard security systems, meaning that the overcrowded population would have easy access to a stockpile of military-grade weapons and ammunition. Inevitably, the tight living situation began to worsen as the already cramped complex was filled with more dwellers born in the vault, and the population began to divide into factions. Some wanted to enforce population control, limiting who in the vault could reproduce, and others violently opposed the idea. Sensing trouble brewing, the overseer locked the armory, denying weaponry to anyone but the certified security staff. Enraged by this infringement of their right to access their recreational miniguns, a group of rioters stormed through the vault, stealing any loose weapons and fighting their way through security and out into the wasteland, with the door quickly being sealed behind them. As fighting raged around the entrance, another group stormed the armory itself. Although unsuccessful, they managed to damage a good chunk of the vault, including the computer system and the main reactor, which began to leak radiation through the now compromised pipes. As the engineering teams in the vault scrambled to repair the damage, the overseer made the horrifying discovery that the controls for the vault door had malfunctioned after its second sealing, trapping the dwellers inside with their decaying reactor. The last fragmented entries left by the overseer are grim indeed. The reactor cannot be fixed, the pipes are flooding the lower levels, and the doors won't budge. All they can do is wait and pray. Pray that someone comes along and opens the door from the outside. Someone to rescue Vault 34 before it's too late, even as their hair falls out and their minds begin to fail. Vault 51 was built into the Appalachian Hills and governed by an AI mainframe going by the designation Zax. Zax's mission was to ultimately determine the best way for a community to select its leader, and soon after the facility's sealing, the dwellers held an election. Then another. It seemed like no one could agree on who would be the best overseer, and tensions began to rise. It was then when Zax's assistant, Robert Baker, mentioned that true leaders step up in times of crises that things really started to go downhill. Taking this to its silicon heart, Zax began to engineer crises at ever-increasing intensities, looking to test Baker's hypothesis and create the ultimate leader. This trial-by-fire process ended up tearing the vault apart, with manufactured food shortages, constant blaring alarms interrupting sleep, and personal grudges inflamed, ultimately pitting dweller against dweller. By the time the residents of Vault 76 made it there, the computer had the answer to who would step up in times of crises, who could weather the storm, and finally lead the community. The only one left alive, Zax, a lone robotic leader overseeing a vault of the dead. Vaults 68 and 69 live in the collective imagination of many wastelanders, achieving almost mythic proportions and with some willing to do almost anything to access them. This is for one simple reason: complete gender imbalance. Vault 69 was filled with 1,000 women and only a single man, and 68 with 1,000 men and one lone woman. Whether one longs to be the subject of that much attention or dreads the idea, it's certainly an experiment with a bizarre, if not cruel, scope. Vault 75 brought the already black morals of Vault-Tec to a new low. Built underneath Malden Middle School, on the outskirts of Boston, 75 was advertised heavily to the children of the school and their families, and when the bombs dropped, they were easily filled to capacity. As the new dwellers entered, the children were separated from their parents, the former heading deeper into the vault, and the latter staying behind for an orientation. Behind soundproof walls, the families of the true intended residents were gunned down by the security detail before being tossed into the incinerators. For this experiment, they needed only young subjects. The experiment at this vault was designed to, through extensive physical training, genetic and hormonal manipulation, and selective breeding, create perfect physical specimens out of the vault's children. Believing nothing was amiss, the students trusted their taskmasters completely, undergoing a grueling training regimen and indoctrination before finally graduating. They thought they would be released into the wasteland, ready to do good on their 18th birthdays. Instead, lackluster subjects were simply killed through a lethal injection disguised as a vaccine, and incinerated. Exceptional candidates were torn apart for their genetic material, and the lucky few who showed intelligence but no physical skills were offered a position on the science team running the experiments. The best of the best's genetic material was then recycled, used to create a new generation of super babies destined to grow up and die in Vault-Tec's endless pursuit of perfection. It's not known exactly how the vault came to be abandoned, but a wily scavenger able to fight through the gunners squatting there may be able to get a hint. According to some of the facility's terminal entries, the test subjects eventually learned of their fate and plotted an uprising against their jailers. One can only hope they succeeded and gained the freedom they were promised, but either way, the savage cycle of Vault 75 was finally broken for good. Not much is known about Vault 77, aside from the fact that it only contained one man, whose name has been lost to history. They say that after spiraling into depression from his long years of isolation, he uncovered a crate of hand puppets in the vault's storage. The puppets spoke to him. Driven mad by his forced solitude, he believed he'd finally found the other vault dwellers he'd dreamt of. As his delusions deepened, however, his Vault Boy puppet began to have greater and greater control over him, manifesting a violent personality that he couldn't control. After murdering the king puppet, he and Vault Boy fled their home, traveling into the wastes and leaving the lonely vault completely abandoned. If Vault-Tec had intended to study the effects of isolation and the lengths one would go to for companionship, they had their answer. All it took was the last threads of one man's sanity. Unlike many of the other Vault-Tec experiments, the hidden purpose behind Vault 81 had a noble goal in mind: the development of a universal cure, something that could free humanity from all disease. Of course, they would design this cure through rampant human testing done on unsuspecting vault dwellers, with many succumbing to the diseases and outlandish cures that would be pumped through the ventilation system. Thankfully for the residents of 81, their overseer was switched at the last minute due to illness, with the compassionate overseer Olivette taking the reins as the bombs began to fall. Disgusted at the idea of running deadly tests on the vault's population, she failed to call on the science team that would inhabit the secret laboratory wing of the facility. Despite her efforts to exclude the scientists and prevent the experiments, 3 made it in, and Olivette was forced to sabotage the ventilation and access systems of the lab, trapping the 3 scientists inside and dashing any chance they had at unleashing their deadly diseases within the vault. After this rocky start, Vault 81 went on to survive and prosper, never knowing how close they came to a slow, grisly end, nor that the ones who would have dealt it to them were still sealed within their walls. Vault 94 was designed to ensure that the post-war world would be able to thrive and feed itself. Along with the dwellers, the vault was stocked with a huge supply of farm-ready seeds as well as a geck to terraform the wasteland following the projected 1-year unsealing process. With this extremely valuable stockpile under their care, one might expect the residents of this vault to be well armed and ready to defend their prize, but Vault-Tec had other ideas. Only those totally dedicated to non-violence would be permitted entry into the vault, with a large proportion being from a religious community of farmers led by the Salivar family. The vault was ruled by a council of residents, with everyone getting a say in how the community would be run. By all accounts, the situation within the vault was utopian, with its peaceful residents eager to repopulate the wastes following their year in isolation. On October 24, 2078, the doors opened and 94 sent out ambassadors across the wastes, inviting all to share in their abundance. In a cruel twist of irony, the vault's welcoming nature was deeply suspicious to the wastelanders of Appalachia, who expected their promise of safe harbor and abundant food was a trap designed to lure in unwary prey. After a brief altercation at the vault's entrance, a group of survivors from the town of Harper's Ferry massacred the residents to a man and destroyed the geck within, irradiating the whole area and driving the countryside's plant life into overdrive. Now nothing remains of Vault 94 or its peaceful residents but an overgrown metal coffin, their innocent dream dying alongside them. Vault 95 was designed as a rehabilitation facility for people suffering from chem addiction. Buff out. Med-X, Mentats, Psycho, it didn't matter. All manner of addicts were accepted into the vault. For years after the bombs dropped, they were all forced to go cold turkey with the help of rehab staff and community support. Slowly, the hopelessly addicted vault dwellers came to grips with their new chemless lifestyle, and society in the vault began to thrive. That's when the real experiment started. 5 years after the vault was sealed, a Vault-Tec agent implanted in the population unsealed a secret stash of hard drugs hidden in a crawlspace. The company wanted to know what would happen if recovered addicts were given a chance to relapse back into their old addictions, and the results were explosive. Some immediately dove back into their old habits, some tried to stop their friends from accessing the stash, and others stayed as far away from the narcotics as possible. Inevitably, the tension between these groups erupted into violence, with the freshly drug-addled residents taking out their frustrations on those who would deny them their high, the conflict driving yet more to the buff-out bottle or Med-X syringe. Social order completely fell apart, and the vault was eventually abandoned, the residents fleeing into the wasteland, the more hopeless among them joining raider gangs to continue feeding their addictions, spreading misery across the Commonwealth. Now the vault is nothing but an empty building used at one time or another by various factions, and currently occupied by the mercenary gunners. Still, some are drawn to the place by the promise of its rehab wing, which could apparently cure any addiction. Whether this miracle procedure is just a fairy tale spawned by stories of the vault's past or not is hotly debated by wastelanders across the Commonwealth, but if true, it could prove a potent prize indeed for anyone still struggling against Psycho's siren song. Vaults 92 and 106 were another pair of shelters with similar experimental designs. Both were designed to test the limits of the human brain when confronted with mind-altering stimuli. In the case of 106, it was a creeping, invisible cloud of hallucinogenic gas, and in Vault 92, it was a constant, never-ending drone of white noise. The results of both experiments were similarly grim, causing some of the vault's residents to become docile, relaxed, and suggestible, while driving others into murderous rages. In 106, this happened almost immediately following its sealing, with enraged dwellers attacking anyone nearby and quickly overrunning both the vault's security team and their helplessly drugged companions. Even hundreds of years later, the toxic gas continues to circulate through the dead vault's vents, causing headaches, nausea, and vivid hallucinations for anyone unfortunate enough to explore its depths. In Vault 92, the violence came slower and was much more insidious. At first, it seemed like the subtle suggestions layered into the noise were making the occupants, all celebrated musicians dedicated to preserving art beyond the apocalypse, more relaxed and suggestible. However, after weeks of constant exposure in every inch of the vault, the residents started to snap, killing colleagues and rampaging through the vault. One such affected man was shot 23 times after tearing a fellow musician limb from limb before finally succumbing to his injuries, kept on his feet only by a frothing, animalistic rage brought on by the mental conditioning. Those less affected by the noise took up arms against their mad former friends, and a silent war broke out beneath the wasteland's surface of which there would be no survivors. Now the vault is full of mirelurks, bloatflies, and other vermin, living in the flooded, crumbling vault which once held the best musical minds of the old world. Built into the mountains of Appalachia, Vault 96 contained only 5 inhabitants, all accomplished scientists and academics, and a vault mainframe installed to organize their efforts. The efforts in question were to shelter plant and animal species native to the region before slowly releasing them back into the wild to repopulate the wasteland ecosystem. At least, this was the public story. In reality, the scientists were intended to research and induce mutations in the region's wildlife, to produce countermeasures against the beasts, as well as develop abilities that could prove useful if harnessed by Vault-Tec. The mainframe running the vault would encourage productivity by conducting its own experiment on the researchers, where it would demand weekly credits earned through their efforts. If they fell behind in their work, the mainframe would allocate appropriate punishments for their laziness. Of course, Vault-Tec being Vault-Tec, an appropriate punishment for not meeting a quota was death via poison gas. By the time the true gravity of the situation had sunk in, one of their colleagues, Nina, had already been killed by the computer, and their ever-increasing quotas were becoming nearly impossible to fulfill. In a last-ditch attempt to escape the vault and inevitable death at the hands of their Silicon taskmaster, the scientists deployed a prototype computer virus to kill the mainframe and unseal the vault. The virus did end up destroying the homicidal machine, but not before it activated a failsafe, flooding the entire vault with poison gas and suffocating the last of the vault's occupants before they could make their escape. With the doors unsealed and no mainframe to run its systems, the animal test subjects of Vault 96 spread into the surrounding hills as the ice from the malfunctioning cryo units inside filled the facility with ice. Now a frozen tomb, the research vault is still packed with scientific instruments and facilities, making it an ideal haunt for any morally bankrupt post-war researchers looking to dabble in a bit of genetic engineering. One of the crueler vault experiments, Vault 108, was intentionally designed to fail spectacularly in as many ways as possible. After its sealing, the dwellers discovered that no one had been assigned to any jobs or other important positions besides the overseer, the chiefs of staff security, and the morale officer. After the chaotic assignment process wasted a good chunk of the vault's resources, the residents thought that they'd put the worst of it behind them and settled in for their new lives underground. Then, just 2 years into their stay, the overseer was diagnosed with brain cancer, which progressed in record time, killing him in a matter of months and sending the vault into yet another panic. Then, once normalcy was finally established again, the vault's main reactor failed, completely frying the power grid and forcing everyone inside to rely on the spotty and clearly strained emergency power supply. Then, with the power failing and the population still reeling from the shakeups in management, the Garys attacked. Alongside its normal functionality, Vault 108 had been equipped with a cloning lab, and the scientists within were performing human trials on a man named Gary. Now, the original Gary had long since died, but the Vault staff had been repeatedly duplicating his clones, creating a total of 54 copies. These clones weren't normal humans, but neither were they some test tube abominations like centaurs. They looked natural enough, but were severely stunted mentally and were psychotically violent towards every other human that wasn't also a Gary clone. Inevitably, these Garys escaped from their observation chambers and ran wild, overpowering the scientists and sweeping the halls of the vault, running down, killing, and even cannibalizing the rest of the vault's population. This downward spiral was no accident, however random it may have seemed. Vault-Tec had wanted to stress test a population to drive them to their limit and see how they'd break. Their overseer had been selected primarily based on his unique susceptibility to cancer. The reactor was only designed to last half of the vault's intended lifespan, and the rec room was barren while the armory was overstocked and unsealed. It was with these weapons that the Garys massacred the vault, weakened by its long-dead designer's malice. Now all that remains of Vault 108 is an empty metal husk, still patrolled by a few lingering clones, the only thing that cuts through the deafening silence. Built in the woods overlooking the town of Sanctuary Hills, Vault 111 was intended as a testbed for cryogenic stasis technology. The residents of this facility would be kept in the dark concerning the process, with only the Vault-Tec staff overseeing the vault being made aware of its true purpose. After being directed into decontamination pods, the dwellers would be frozen, with the attending staff observing the results of their extended suspended animation. The experiment went off without a hitch, the scientists observing the frozen test subjects, taking notes, and compiling data. The test was supposed to last for 180 days, after which the vault could be unsealed with an all-clear from Vault-Tec headquarters or an overseer decree. But no all-clear came. The overseer also refused to unseal the doors manually, citing fears of deadly radiation just outside the vault. Eventually, in the face of dwindling supplies, the vault broke out into full-scale civil war, with the security and support staff assaulting the overseer and his loyalists, who responded by sending the whole facility into lockdown, entombing anyone who survived the bloody clash. The frozen residents of Vault 111 slept through it all, and for another 150 years beyond that, until finally, the door was opened again. Who knows what the strange and dangerous wasteland holds in store for anyone woken from their frozen slumber? Vault 112 was located under an unassuming garage on the outskirts of Washington and was designed to test the long-term exposure of test subjects to the virtual reality loungers that filled the facility. These pods were equipped with a neural interface and life support systems, which would allow their occupants to live an idealized life free from harm in a simulation instead of the cramped confines of the vault. What could have been heaven for the 85 inhabitants chosen for this vault quickly became a living hell as their overseer, Stanislaus Braun, began to slowly go insane. Braun was a brilliant Vault-Tec scientist responsible for the invention of the miraculous Garden of Eden creation kit, or GEC. However, the 200 years that had passed since the vault's sealing took a toll on him. By 2277, the man had become sadistic and bloodthirsty beyond measure. His position as overseer granted him godlike control over the simulation, able to rewrite and manipulate it as he saw fit. He used this power to torment the vault's inhabitants, breaking up marriages, arranging accidents, and even killing some occupants before wiping their minds and rebooting them back into the simulation. The helpless vault dwellers had to endure the agony of being killed and resurrected, only to be killed again for almost 200 years, completely at the mercy of Braun. Depending on the choices of the lone wanderer, when they inevitably stumble across the vault in the search for their father, they could either remain in that horrible limbo for many years to come, or receive peace with the activation of a failsafe program, allowing them to finally die and leaving Braun trapped on his own in the simulation. A just punishment for a man so cruel and twisted. Vault 118 was located on Mount Desert Island off the coast of Maine and buried underneath the Cliff's Edge Hotel. The hotel was a high-class retreat for wealthy tourists visiting the island, and the vault being built below it was designed to reflect this luxury. Vault-Tec advertisements presented this particular shelter as an exclusive, refined, and desirable living space, where its inhabitants would be tended to hand and foot by robotic staff. While this was true and the complex was equipped with fine living quarters, amenities, and a large contingent of robot servants, the company failed to mention that there would be other residents included in the guest list. The overseer was instructed to, once the bombs began to drop, open the vault to a secretive second list, one composed entirely of working-class members recruited from surrounding towns. These poorer residents would be funneled into a cramped and uncomfortable second wing and left at the mercy of the wealthier inhabitants and their metal underlings. By maintaining and enhancing a divide in social class, the scientists at Vault-Tec hoped to study the effects of unlimited social power, the effects of class conflict on social stability, and the likelihood of a closed system erupting into all-out class warfare. Fortunately, this second wing was neither completed nor filled by the time the bombs fell, as funding fell through after several investors pulled out of the project. When the vault finally had to be used, only the well-appointed section was complete and safely housed its population of wealthy inhabitants for a time. After a period of confinement, however, one resident, a General Atomics scientist by the name of Bert Riggs, convinced the rest of his group to transfer their brains into some of the robotic shells they had on hand. That way, they would be able to outlast the war and take their rightful place once this all blew over. Now converted into robo-brains, the totally insane residents of Vault 118 are mostly harmless, but one shudders imagining the damage they could cause if the vault had been completed. If 300 innocent residents were lorded over by mad, immortal, and fabulously rich masters. Vault 114 was almost the complete opposite. Built right underneath Boston's downtown core, it had similar advertising to 118 with a unique twist. The promised luxury wouldn't be delivered. Instead, the rich families would be confined to small one-room apartments and placed under the control of a notoriously anti-upper-class overseer. The individual chosen for this task was a local homeless man by the name of Soup Can Harry, whose hobbies included eating Abraxo cleaner and uncovering secret Illuminati strongholds in downtown dumpsters. The experiment aimed to discover the outcome if the roles of wider society were reversed, and the poor and disadvantaged were able to rule over the rich. Like 118, this vault was never completed and stood empty for over 100 years, but has since become a haunt for gangsters and other troublemakers in the heart of Boston's post-apocalyptic downtown. And there you have it, every vault experiment in Fallout. Though some were made to be shelters and others research laboratories, the experimental vaults remain the most disturbing yet fascinating offer from everyone's favorite slimy pre-war corporation.